Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. Again, apologies for any technical hitches that we've had this afternoon. It's really great to see you and really great to be able to talk about this topic of neurodiversity. I want to start by saying a big thank you on behalf of my social enterprise, Rocking Your Teens. Your donations go towards increasing resilience, inspiring and raising aspirations in teenagers. And if anyone wants to find out more about Rocking Your Teens, do go to rockingyourteens.com. I will put the link to that in the chat a bit later on. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Jenny Garrett. I'm an award-winning career coach, author, and leadership trainer. My books explore the empowerment of working women and women in leadership roles. And together with my team, we use our years of experience in coaching and leadership to support women and those from ethnically diverse backgrounds to progress in the workplace, as well as supporting majority group leaders to make inclusion happen. As I said, today's session is focused on neurodiversity. Judy Singer, who was a sociologist who has autism, started using the term neurodiversity in the late 1990s. It refers to the concept that certain developmental disorders are normal variations in the brain, and people who have these features also have certain strengths. It's actually estimated that around 1 in 7 people, which is more than 15% of people in the UK, are neurodivergent, meaning that the brain functions, learns, and processes information differently. And neurodivergence includes a range of conditions, including ADHD, attention deficit disorders, autism, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. The National Autistic Society reports at least 700,000 autistic adults in the UK, of which only 15% are in employment. And according to the British Dyslexia Association, the number of individuals with dyslexia in the UK is around 10%, with 4% of the population at the severe end of the dyslexia continuum. Those who identify as neurodivergent are underemployed and represent an untapped talent pool for businesses. During this session, experienced executive coaches Sassy, Geeta, and Janice, and perhaps our colleague Suki, if she finds her way here, all listed in the Diverse Coach Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches from ethnically diverse backgrounds. We'll discuss what neurodiversity means to them and why it matters in the world of work. And I'll also give you a link to that directory later on. So the process will be that our coaches introduce themselves. I will start off by asking them a few questions, and then we'll open it up to you for your questions and reflections. We'll do our best to keep an eye on the chat throughout. The hashtag for the event is neurodiversity, and I'll also put the other handles that we can use on Twitter in the chat as well. So we're going to start with a poll. And it's just getting an insight really into whether neurodiversity is something that you consider in your place of work. Is it something that you think about? Is it something that you consider? So I'm hoping that you can see the poll there. So the question, does your organization consider neurodiversity when developing its processes and systems? Yes, no, or are you unsure? Oh, it's really evenly split on this one. Is anything going to come out ahead? Let's have a look. 87% of you have completed it. Oh, 91%. So we're really getting a full house, which is great. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So fascinating, actually. 41% of you say yes, your organization does consider neurodiversity, which is brilliant, and actually much higher than I expected. 27% say no, and 32% unsure. So it is the majority that is no and unsure, but not bad, I think, that we have a 41% saying yes. So great to see where we're at. So some of you will have thought about this quite a lot. And for others of you, this will be a new concept that you'll be thinking about more in your organizations. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves, and I'm going to start with asking Geeta to say hi to everyone.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Geeta Ramachandran. I'm a leadership coach. I work with individuals and wider organizations for transformation. I am the director of Powerfully Human Coaching and Consultancy, and I'm also a community lead for a group of coach practitioners within the Association for Coaching and a circle host at the Leadership Circle. I am fascinated by the human dynamics that exist within organizations, and my focus is always on how can we tap the full power of an individual, the potential of an individual to contribute to the fullest, and they're a team, and how we can maximize their potential as well.
Fabulous, great introduction. Thanks so much, Geeta. I'll go to Janice next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Janice Taylor. I'm delighted to be here. I'm a career coach and writer. I'm based down in sunny Brighton, and it is pretty sunny down here at the moment. My interest in neurodiversity stems from two things, really. One, that recently a family member has been diagnosed with ADHD, and that's been really interesting to see how that will unfold rather. And also, years ago, I used to work with the BBC on their Extend programme, and that was about making the careers within the BBC more accessible to people with a range of conditions, and that was really interesting too. So yes, that's kind of where I'm coming from with regards to neurodiversity. I think it's a huge area to explore.
Thanks so much, Janice. And last but definitely not least, Sassy. Don't forget to unmute yourself.
But carried away there. Hi there, everyone. Yes, my name's Sassy Panchan, and I'm an executive leadership coach. And I work with managers and leaders to support them to make sustainable behavioural change, especially when it comes to leadership and managing other people, and really helping them to bring out the best in themselves. I work with organisations to help them to really help understand how can you bring out more of a team and maximise the potential, especially of individuals who may be of quieter, maybe not being able to be fully themselves as well. And that enables me to be, what enables me to do that is I'm a practitioner in psychological safety, and I also apply applied neuroscience to the approach that I take with individuals. And why am I interested in this topic? I think we all have so many different ways of thinking and behaving and engaging in the world. And why don't we just kind of look to see how much more of that potential we can enhance within a working environment, because we would all be benefiting from being more of ourselves and really being confident and comfortable in contributing more.
Love that. And also I've got a bit of wallpaper envy as well. Really, it's a beautiful wallpaper behind you. Fabulous. So great to hear. You can hear there's a wealth of experience, curiosity, and interest in this topic from the coaches that we have with us today. And it's just really lovely to hear that they're coming at it from different places. Our coaches don't always agree with each other, and I think that can be useful, that you're going to get different perspectives from all of us, or you might sometimes also get violent agreement as we talk through this topic today. So my first question that I'm going to ask you is, why does neurodiversity matter? And I'm going to go straight back to you, Sassy. Why does neurodiversity matter?
It matters on a number of different fronts, but I'll choose one. It's that two perspectives. So if we think about individuals and how they engage and how they bring more of themselves in the workplace, those of individuals who identify with being neurodivergent tendency not to bring more of themselves into the workplace. They try and fit in, they try to adopt the norm and the culture and try to be like everybody else. But as we know, they have hidden talents, hidden strengths, and it takes organizations to really put in place the procedures or support that they need to really bring it out, that those individuals, they think differently, they engage differently, they interpret things in a different way. So if organizations are looking at challenges or a strategy or an opportunity, including more diverse perspectives and input into that conversation, into the discussion, enables them to have solutions that they may not have thought about that could just come from the mainstream. So really it is about engaging more of them. And by doing that, I think it helps them to build their confidence as well and to bring more of themselves into the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I've definitely had clients myself who've said, I have dyslexia, but no one here knows. You know, and that energy to hide some part of you means that you're not really being able to fully engage in the workplace. So yeah, it's really unlocking that potential, I think is such a good point, Sassy. And what about you, Geeta? What do you think?
Like Sassy was saying, there are people who sometimes identify with neurodiversity, but then they have hidden talents and strengths which could be untapped. And the focus on this matters, like you know, ableism, like sexism, like often there are artificial boundaries around who we consider as able. I have been following the work of one particular organization, and I can give more details later. It's an organization with 75% of people who are neurodivergent. And it's interesting, even their logo, it's like the dandelion. It's like how you have dandelions in our garden. We think of it as a weeds, and focusing on neurodiversity. And there are gardens of dandelion where they are farmed and you can see their benefit. And it's a beautiful way in which we see every single human being who works in our organization and around us as bringing some ability to the front. And neurodiversity matters because it focuses our attention on seeing what we're missing here.
I love that. Yeah, really. And that's a great image to hold, isn't it? You know, that yeah, the flower growing in the wrong place becomes a weed, and let's find the right places for people so they can actually thrive and flourish. Yeah. So and Janice, your thoughts?
I guess kind of building on what Geeta and Sassy have already said and yourself, it's very much around, I think, people being in a position where they can fulfill their potential and really show up and engage. I think the workplace shouldn't be just a place where people survive. It should be a place where people can thrive. And I think if you can do that, if you can show up with who you really are, with all your strengths and your talents, then I think you're more likely to be able to do that, actually. I think it's telling that what you said before about only sort of 15% of people are in employment. And I just think that's shocking. I find that shocking, actually. And yeah.
There's so many parallels with different aspects of how we decide on the majority group being the right way and the minority group being wrong, isn't there? And I feel that you know, those who are on that neurodivergent spectrum can be considered, you know, can feel that they're made to feel as if they're wrong all the time, rather than actually us not deciding what the norm is and us appreciating everyone.
The only other thing I would say is how much energy is spent in people masking as well, actually, how much time and energy is spent them masking, not really feeling they can show up as who they really are. So yeah, it's all about potential for me. Yes,
yeah. A point that Suki made when we were having our conversation was that actually there's also a war on talent, isn't there, right now? And that's important to consider. Who are you excluding who might really bring something to your business, you know, for whatever reason, when actually if you were more inclusive and open, you might really tap into some talent that could unlock different aspects of your business that you hadn't thought about before. So you know, in a very competitive environment, who are you excluding as well is something to consider from that business perspective. So my next question for you is, you know, what can organizations do to make their people management approach neurodiversity smart? So the way in which they manage people, how can they be more neurodiversity smart, do you think? And I'll come to you first this time, Janice.
Thank you. I think organizations could potentially look at how they're actually recruiting staff. Actually, are their processes open? Are they diverse enough, actually? Because I think if you're asking everyone to do exactly the same thing all the time, who are you excluding, actually? So I think certainly they need to look at how they recruit. And then I think they also need to look at how they onboard, actually. You know, what is that experience going to be like if you are not neurodivergent, actually? So yeah, those are two things I think they certainly could be looking at, actually. The interview isn't always necessarily the best way, where, you know, you can get people who are perhaps good at talking through things, but you could consider, you know, how else could someone show you what they're capable of?
Yeah, such a good point. I was recruiting someone recently for my business, and I gave the questions in advance so that the person could prepare, and it really helped them. The things that we do, that when you think about it, why are we doing it? Why do we surprise people with questions? Is that really necessary? What are we learning from that? When we really could instead be helping people be fully prepared for the situation. So actually reviewing, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it just because we've always done it this way? And who is it disadvantaging in that recruitment process is a really good place for businesses to start, I think. So yeah, completely agree with you, Janice. And Geeta?
Sure. Building on what you have said, this aspect is about people we already have in the organization who, for whatever reason, have not expressed their tendencies for neurodiversity. Not everybody gets labeled, and it's a big question even, is there a label that's needed even? What are we doing to people when we label them? So with respect to, Sasi mentioned earlier, psychological safety, there are 3 steps to it, right? To create psychologically safe space where people can share their challenges and they can share their ideas and opinions. But then beyond psychological safety, how actively are we listening to what is being said? And how can we action that? So there is something about culture that we can create within an organization to improve neurodiversity. And in my coaching, I come across leaders who are neurodivergent, and I've also coached heads of special needs schools. And there is a fundamental conversation that we're missing to have and to learn from special needs schools, for example. And we have, so in the people who we already have in the organization, to see what tasks do we have, what job roles do we have that could potentially benefit from the skills that a neurodivergent person has. For example, memory, ability for complexity, ability for, there are so many strengths that these people have. So what kind of jobs and tasks do we have, and to assess that, and to even maybe create a separate department, which is like a special needs school, that caters for within the organization. There are many ways in which you can do it. These are just some of them.
Really interesting points you've brought up here, and I'm really curious to know what the audience is thinking as we're discussing. So please do feel free to write in the chat and add your questions. The idea of not labeling and labeling is a challenge in itself. Sometimes we label so we can focus, don't we? Otherwise, we might not take any notice. But also, does the label then become a stereotype and a burden? There is so many degrees to which you can be neurodivergent in so many ways, and everyone will show up differently. So we have to be careful not to generalize. So I think that's really interesting, and definitely some of the companies who specifically go out of their way to recruit those who are neurodivergent will put them on very detailed work, maybe repetitive work, things where they're finding mistakes and small errors. So that would be really interesting to think if it's a specific department or if it's something about how we're just inclusive generally across the board. So you answered the question, but you also posed quite a few, Geeta, in that answer. That's really made me think. And what about yourself, Sasi? How do you think that organizations can be more smart in the way they support they manage their neurodivergent colleagues?
Yeah, I think one of the ways actually is to look at a point that Janice brought up, which is around recruitment, but actually looking to see, where are you recruiting from? Mm-hmm. Is it just the kind of graduate schemes, university graduates coming out? Are you looking beyond that? Are you looking at individuals that are coming through community or NGOs, charities, individuals where they feel that they want to contribute more and have a bigger role, that you might be able to offer them that opportunity as well. And I think looking and spreading your recruitment pool and where you're looking for candidates, but also going back and designing processes and recruitment, selection and candidate interviewing, that they can really help you with that as well, especially if you go out into the community of charities that are working with individuals from neurodivergent tendencies as well. I think they definitely have a big pool of expertise that you can tap into, which I don't think is often thought about, because I think it's always kind of the mainstream way of recruiting people in through job adverts. They could help you to establish different ways of engaging with neurodivergent individuals who have a different way of engaging with, it might an interview might put them off, but maybe some interactive exercise or face-to-face could even open up the way that those individuals are recruited into an organization. But I think you need to get a little bit more savvy about where you're going to get those individuals from as well.
I think, yeah, such a good point. You need to spread your net wide in order to get the right people. And there's also how do you make sure you're inclusive once they're in? Because I think so many organizations find that they recruit for diversity, but then they don't retain people, whether that's on, whichever protected characteristic that might be around. And it's also about what does that person need to be able to thrive? What extra support might they need, or different support might they need in place? And I know there's more out there than there used to be, but sometimes people don't know about it, especially if they've been masking something for quite some time. I'm thinking about a couple of clients I've had who have been diagnosed in later life as well. I think people always expect people to know that they're neurodivergent from an early age, but that's not always the case. So yeah, again, lots to think about in terms of what do we do to be inclusive as well. So I'm going to ask you more about that. What are your tips to create more inclusive teams, when they include those who are neurodivergent? And I will start with Geeta.
Sure. Interestingly, one of the leaders I work with was neurodivergent. In a team meeting, he might suddenly pause and say, hang on, I'm having a neural explosion here. And then we, with respect, we pause. We give a few minutes for him to jot down. And there is a huge power in that kind of an explosion. He's seen already from one point that we've raised, he's seen 10 other points coming up. And with feedback, he's learned that it might not make sense to share all the 10 points right there, right then, but then to hold back. So just to help them know certain techniques to show their skills and their strengths in a way that benefits the wider team. So, in terms of, say, the reason I mentioned a special sort of needs school-like department was often in software testing, especially, there is a difference between the kind of skill sets you need for developing software and a different kind of a skill set you need for testing software. This company that I mentioned, Special Eastern, it was started in 2004, and it has 60 employees, and it's got contracts with Microsoft, with Oracle, with Lego, and like I mentioned then, it has 75% of their staff are neurodivergent. And what they say is when they have clients visiting, they kind of educate them on, for example, small talk or expectations for those things. And people who work there say that I enjoy working here because I can just be myself. There are no expectations. So when we say tips for building a team, be aware when you're, for example, if you're doing a social event or if you're doing meeting up for drinks and things like that, be aware that everybody needs to feel comfortable, and create options where even if you're doing something as simple as a team activity like a mural board or a meeting, share the link beforehand, because for some people, they might want to work on it before, and some people cannot do it spontaneously. So anything and everything that we do, if we allow for this range of possibilities for different kinds of people to contribute towards in their best way, I think that would be besides the psychological safety, listening and actioning that I mentioned before, I think that would be a good way to create a great team.
Yeah, a colleague who I do some work with, she always says it shouldn't be about what are the needs of the individual, let me adapt for them. You should always design for everyone so that whatever you do is accessible for everyone, rather than them having to come out and say, I need it in advance, or I need, I need this different background, or I need the slides in black and white, that's really going to help me, or whatever it is. If we design for everyone, for it to be the most inclusive it can be, people then don't feel like they're the odd one who has to make that special request. So I think that's, the points you're making there about thinking in advance are really helpful. So it's not about just thinking, can I serve the majority group? It's about, can I serve everyone? And I know that I shared with you all when I was talking before an example of a client I had some years ago who really found it challenging. Their role was to do a lot of socializing, even though it didn't really work for them. And they found that they had to have a crutch, which was drinking, to be able to do what they needed to do to be successful in the role. So it's really helpful to understand how far you might be pushing someone. We all want to grow and develop and step outside our comfort zone, but there are points at which you're pushing someone too far, which will be quite damaging to them. So it's also knowing where that line is, from helping someone to be social or do what they need to do, learn how to do small talk, versus a role that would be all about small talk, for example, would be too much potentially for some people. Thank you, Geeta. I will ask Janice next.
I think for me, it's coming back to creating a psychological safe space, I think, where people feel that safe enough to show up as who they really are, actually. And I know we've touched on this already. I did actually find a little article which I can post up or include in the notes later, on 9 strategies to create a psychological safe space. And one of them was, and the first thing was self-awareness. If you're aware of, who you are as a manager, and being aware of perhaps some of your biases or some of the things that might be running through your head, I think that might be a good place to start, actually. But yeah, certainly I think organization, if you want to build an inclusive team, it needs to be safe and there needs to be trust there, I think. And that probably starts with you perhaps being a bit more vulnerable and open, maybe, as well, because I think I'm a great believer in modeling too.
Yes, yeah, I think you're so right, and it requires time, doesn't it? Time and space to be able to think in this way and move out of your usual ways of working and your usual habits. There's a slowing down that I think is required to actually move out of things that are automatic, to think about what's needed. And I definitely would advocate for that. Thank you so much. And Sassy, yes, Sassy.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things actually in this one, is that raising self-awareness for leaders and managers who are going to be interacting with these individuals as well, with tendencies around neurodiversity, and specifically around reverse mentoring is a really good opportunity for individuals to understand things like language. So that's one of the key things, is that, for example, the way in which a person who identifies as being neurodivergent might find that some of their language might not be palatable. And I think it brings back to a point that Geeta was saying earlier as well, is that what is that language? What's that vocabulary? And is there an education piece on both sides, actually, for the leaders and organization managers as well as individuals, to understand what is language that could be less inflammatory, or one that actually enables everyone to be understood and listened to, with a bit of compassion as well, actually, within that as well. And I think what's really important there is one of the ways to do that is to understand through reverse mentoring, what are the things that enable individuals to be more of themselves in the workplace through the language that they use. I remember recently with a candidate who is on the autistic spectrum, had said, well, Sassy, in a coach session, well, I don't know if it's going to be career suicide to be as honest as I can and bring myself true self into the workplace, because I speak very bluntly, I speak very literal terms. And then conversely, on the other side, it's like the language that the organization uses, it's speaking in metaphors, in similes, you know, kind of nuances that I don't really understand. And so again, you know, if there's a two-way communication of understanding each other and using language that supports each other to be understood and listened to, I think that's really a great tip for both all the individuals within an organization.
Yeah, I really love that, actually, that idea of the gap between between us speaking the same language, but yeah, missing the boat, and you know, even saying something like missing the boat, you know, using all of this language where we could be more direct and more clear. And it might be something for many of us to take a moment and think about, or at least rephrase. So when we share a metaphor, to explain what we mean by that metaphor, we don't necessarily have to take the language away, but explain where you're coming from when you use the language could be helpful too. And that's something that all of us can stop and do and think about. So my last question for you before I open it up to the audience: any tips for those who actually identify as neurodivergent in terms of how can we help them be more successful in the workplace? There may be some in the audience today, based on the fact that it's 15% of the population. It probably is 15% of this room. So what tips might you have for those who are neurodivergent in terms of them being successful in the workplace? And I'll start with Janice.
Thank you. I was just having a look at my notes.
Good.
I was interested because there was a question about, you know, about assessment and diagnosis. So and I know traditionally getting sort of like diagnosis can be incredibly difficult. So I did manage to find a couple of free online assessments for people, because it might be that you want to learn a little bit more about or understand a little bit more about how you operate and where on the scale you might appear, actually. So that's one thing. So and the other thing I think is also helpful to I've been following people on LinkedIn, actually. There are a lot of people out there writing in this space, sharing their knowledge, sharing webinars. And one of them is Professor Amanda Kirby I've been following on LinkedIn. So I've been gathering information from people who are regularly writing in this field and who have some knowledge and experience in this field. So that's one of the things I've been doing.
Yeah, such a good idea to follow people, whether it's, you know, whatever social media platform you choose, who are talking and advocating about their experience, because it is the lived experience that we would love to understand as well. And your links are being requested. If you wouldn't mind posting that, if it's possible, Janice, that would be really, really lovely. I'll go to Sassy next.
Sure. I think there's three key roles I would advocate. And one is in the organization to secure a mentor. Now that mentor has more of a relationship in terms of being able to help individuals to understand how to navigate within an organization. Things that we talked about earlier about the language, about being able to understand opportunities that might be available, developmental opportunities as well. And also just around professionalism, etiquette, those sort of things that we would normally take for granted going into an organization, that they can help them to understand in ways in which to etiquette within meetings, etiquette within social arenas as well. But also they can actually do reverse mentoring, which is really incredibly powerful in organizations where they really embrace it, where individuals along the neurodivergent spectrum can actually educate leaders in organizations as to what is it like to have these sort of tendencies, what would be really helpful in the workplace for them to be able to feel fully integrated and included. So there's a real wealth of information coming from that mentoring resource. Have a sponsor who's a real advocate for you in the organization to help, again, to navigate, to position you, to be able to understand where you might fit in within opportunities within an organization. And thirdly, for yourself to secure a coach. And that's also to enable you to understand how can you bring more of your true strengths, your true self, more being comfortable and feeling of belonging and asking for what you need within the workplace, and being able to have a safe space, a trusting place to bring up those challenges. that will really help you to really excel and really start to help to find solutions that really help you within the workplace.
Yeah, so I think I'm hearing loud and clear, don't try and do this alone from you, Sassy. Get that support around you to really fortify you and help you navigate the workplace successfully. And maybe that's part of the challenge. You know, one of the things why we only have, one of the reasons why we only have a small percentage of people who are neurodivergent working or who admit to being neurodivergent in the workplace, because actually that support isn't there, and maybe they are feeling very isolated. So I think that's really important. And Geeta.
Sure, thank you. Building on what Sassy just said about mentor and having someone, it's useful as if you're a neurodivergent person, identify somebody who you can speak to, where you can open up. And sometimes if you have a line manager, ask for explicit feedback to be given to you, because for some it might not be as obvious as it is for neurotypical people. And share your challenges and ask for what you need. Unless you speak up, others around you will not become aware as to what your needs are. And again, do not think that this is something strange or weird. Everybody has needs, and in general in the team, everybody should be encouraged to share their challenges and ask for what they need. But especially so if you have a need that you might be impacting the way you think or can prevents you from becoming who you really can be, then open up and find that channel through which you can express yourself.
Such good points. Thank you all so much. Yeah, I think there is a lot of support necessary. And I know that particularly people who are unemployed going into work, there's something, well, actually, I think it's also available for those in work. There's something called access to work from the government, and they can give you help getting to work. They can help give you a computer with the right software that you might need, all sorts of things. So if you are struggling in any way or need some support, there is government support out there, and it's financial as well as physical support. I think you can also have a work coach to help you with what you need to be able to be successful. So you're not alone. You have coaches like us, you have people in your organization, you have government support as well to help you be successful. So please don't forget that, and please don't suffer on your own. And there's lots of links that we've shared here as well, which I hope will be helpful to you. So just reading some of these points, I wasn't quite sure, Joseph, what this point meant, but perhaps Geeta will know, and maybe it was at the moment in time. So you're saying, I'm wondering who is neurodivergent from the norm. Does the diagnosis define the starting point of this spectrum? So I didn't quite understand the question, but I guess maybe it's thinking who's decided what the norm is. And I guess, I think what happens is the norm is the average or the majority group, isn't it? That's how I think that we decide on things in society, not me personally, but I think that's often what happens. So if you're in the minority as opposed to the majority, then you're not the norm and you deviate from it. I think that's who decides that. And as a result, then you're always working with this label, as Geeta mentioned. But I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that point.
One of the links that I added was given to me by a neurodivergent coachee I worked with at one point. And he said for him, this highly sensitive kind of test, it helped him to know what was his degree of sensitivity. Usually people innately know when they feel challenged or when they have those needs that do not seem to be met by usual day-to-day occurrences. So if Joseph, your question was about the spectrum and where does one start and where does it end, I suspect that there is a lot of research and data and tests and official kind of information that might expand on neurodiversity and who are those with special needs, I guess. So I wouldn't be able to give definitively an answer of where it starts and where it ends. But then I think at this time and age in our society, with the amount of research that's being put in in both in the field of medicine and in society and things like that, we're lucky to have at least a starter kind of information on what these like different sort of spectrum conditions are and what are the qualities of them. So yeah, there are some good books as well available on this if you would like to explore that.
Thank you so much. Danielle has said it's definitely about people admitting to being neurodivergent. And it's also good when there are leaders open to show other leaders that they are neurodivergent. So this sort of role modeling piece is very important. And as you've all said, the psychological safety, because I'm not going to say I have dyslexia or dyspraxia if I think it's going to be held against me or thrown in my face at some point. I have to know that it's okay. So that role modeling, self-disclosure from others, making it okay, normalizing it is a key part of moving forward. So thank you. And she's also said there's coaching available through Exceptional Individuals, which must be an organization that I'm not so familiar with. But she's also mentioned the access to work that I mentioned. So a really useful, interesting point that Danielle is making here as well is that there's not much research in terms of the intersectionality piece. So a lot of the research around neurodiversity is around white men. The examples that I've been coming across recently have not been white men, I can definitely speak a little bit to that, but I don't know if anyone else wants to speak about the intersectionality aspect of neurodiversity.
I just wanted to say, I think it is important to acknowledge that we're not just one thing. We don't just fit into one box or however you want to, or just have one label. You know, people are, you know, there are many layers to this actually, and I think we can lose that when we just stick to a particular group. So I think it's important to understand the nuance and the layers that and the effects are going to probably be compound, I suppose. If you're female, you happen to be from a diverse community, you're neurodivergent as well. There's, you know, you can just kind of see this going up and up and up actually. So that's all I wanted to say really.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, did you want to say something, Geeta?
I just wanted to add to what Janice and you said. I was mentioning earlier the special needs school and some of the heads I've been coaching. I find that if we were to closely consider how a child grows and evolves, and to make a note of sort of the strengths that they exhibit or the different sort of this intersectionality or how it kind of crosses over kind of thing, I think we can learn a lot. I feel like between organizations and the special needs schools, there is a gap in our working together in learning more about this. We're going the medical route and depending on the labels, but that doesn't need to be all that we do. If we can understand better and more from the experiences of special needs schools and as they work with children, I think there is something that we will learn more of in terms of these this question of a mixture between them. And like Janice said before, personally, I also do not see it fits in one box. None of us do. I guess we're all divergent in some aspect or the other for sure. So there is no normal really. And there was another book, I can post the link on the chat, Searching for Normal, I think the title was. It was a fascinating experience sharing of a person who often when children go through all these tests and labeling and things, it's quite a challenging kind of thing. It's not easy and it's not comfortable. So that is a process in itself. But then this person shares, so what was normal then? And so the Searching for Normal was an interesting read for me, but yeah.
Sounds great. I've definitely come across examples when we've been running programs for those from ethnic minority backgrounds where people haven't disclosed that they're neurodivergent and it comes out later. And then what we find is they've been getting no support, but also how they've been showing up has maybe been seen as defensive, or that, you know, they've got an attitude problem. And what it is that they're trying to cope with so much, and because they're masking it, and they're maybe trying to seem really confident or trying to seem on top of things, people are misinterpreting their behavior. So I do think, Danielle, this is a really good point in terms of the misinterpretation of people's behavior because of the intersection of identities that they are managing at a particular time. And often that isn't delved into, you know, that space to understand, okay, because of your dyslexia, you are a bit, you know, it's taking you longer to read the kind of reports that I'm giving you, which then is making you a bit defensive when I ask you about it because I haven't got the time. But also because you are a Black woman, I'm also thinking you're aggressive anyway. You know, all of these things that are compounded. And Kimberly Crenshaw, who came up with that idea around intersectionality, talks about the compound effect, the fact that 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 when it comes to intersectionality. It actually equals so much more. So it's the, you know, as Janice was saying, the gender plus the ethnicity plus the neurodiversity, you know, it makes more than 3. It makes maybe 300, and it is a challenge, and it is something for us to consider. As organizations get better and better at getting data, you know, those who are been collating data around gender and maybe around ethnicity more broadly, I think the better we get at it and the more we have, then we can start looking at those intersections and understanding them better as well. But most organizations, I would say, particularly in the UK, have a long way to go, but doesn't mean we won't get there. You know, we absolutely, I think we'll get there. And then we'll get there, and then hopefully we'll get to a point where we don't need to collate it anymore because we'll be working in such an inclusive way that that actually it won't be needed. But we have to go through this process to get to a place where we don't need it anymore. That's my perspective anyway. Any last questions or thoughts on this? I think we've been having a really interesting discussion.
Jenny, I was just going to make one point in that in listening to everybody, and if we think about the questions that we've talked about today, the responses that we've got from each one of us, and also engaging in the chat, it really highlights to me just the fact that we are all on this kind of neurodivergent spectrum somewhere, because each one of us brought so much diversity to the conversation today from our experience. But if we take it a step back, you know, that's been our lived experience. That's been the way in which we've integrated. We have interacted and engaged, how we've interpreted the situations that we've been in order to be able to bring the experience into this particular webinar today. And I can't help but think back to my previous experience of being in a corporate organization where in order to fit in, I wasn't being my true self and bringing more of that, but having left and just realizing actually there is more that you can, in the right circumstances, there is more that you can be of yourself and bring when you feel that you have that sense of trust in yourself as well as trust in others. And also just how much more could this open up to the wider society, wider community by us being accepting, and the fact that just believing actually that's the normal. We don't all have to fit into what we think is normal, but the norm is that we are all different. We're all on this scale of being neurodivergent, and embracing that as being something that we can all celebrate and actually benefit from as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Such good points. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think absolutely seeing the strengths, you know, this is not a disability, this is not a hindrance, this is something that you bring, a superpower, isn't it, really? And unlocking that. And, you know, that's what we should all be doing in our workplaces, just unlocking the superpowers of each other, instead of thinking, what don't you have? You know, what's holding you, you know, what's holding you back? Why, you know, what don't you have that the majority group have? I think we need to turn it on its head, and I think it's so possible because we've, in the last 2 years, been turning so much on its head, haven't we? In the way we work, in the way we think about working. So thanks very much, Danielle, who's, I think, shared. Is it a question? I wasn't sure if it was a question or a resource. How do we get leaders in organizations to be open about their neurodiversity and be specific? It's actually a question there. So we'll make that the final question. How do we get leaders in organizations to be open about their neurodiversity?
I can share some experiences I've had on this, if you like. Sometimes creating a community within an organization, which is led by leaders, and leaders could take turns maybe, and there are ways in which we can create this openness by creating a neurodiverse community, and by having leaders who have identified as, it takes just one person to say, hey, I'm neurodiverse and I'm on the spectrum, and again, creating that safe space for them to express them, even as leaders, is important before we even get to this next stage, right? But then in order to support that, I've seen successful attempts at this, to have such communities and to encourage conversations, and then for them to go back and share these learnings with their respective teams. So in that respect, for leaders, and then sometimes creating even all your rewards and your recognition system and your celebration stuff that you create within a team or an organization, if even for leaders or their teams, if we could create in there, we celebrate this kind of a list as to if you share your needs and your special needs or your challenges, then we celebrate that. And that could also encourage. So these are a couple of ways in which I've seen this to be brought into force.
Lovely, lovely examples. Anyone want to add anything to that?
I think a simple piece around that is simple enough, but maybe more nuanced, is you yourself being comfortable. What do you need to be comfortable, to be able to voice that, to be able to engage, to be able to really have show by example? Because I know that the leaders that I've coached come across as well, is that the more vulnerability that they share, the more courage that they share with others, it leads a really great example for others to follow in those footsteps as well. So you might be seen as a progressive, but you're helping others along the way as well, which I think is a really courageous step for a leader to take in an organization.
Wonderful, wonderful points there. And I think absolutely unlocking the way in which you want to talk about it, the how you feel about your own neurodiversity, and working through that so that you can come out and talk about it in a coaching space can be quite powerful. So I want to ask you all, what is the big coaching question that anyone who wants to explore and understand neurodiversity in the workplace better should be asking themselves? And I'm going to start with Geeta. What's the big coaching question that anyone who wants to explore and understand neurodiversity in the workplace better should be asking themselves?
A very simple question could be, who can I speak to next to understand neurodiversity better? Because the first step in this journey is awareness. So to ask yourself, for example, is there anyone around me that I know is neurodiverse? Or is any book that I can find, which I can read, or anything like that? So what can I do next, or who can I speak to next to understand neurodiversity better?
Lovely. Suki?
Did you mean me, Sassy?
Yeah. Sorry, Sassy, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay, not a problem. I think as a consequence of today, just even think about the one simple step or action step that you can take to be a little bit vulnerable and go out there and maybe working on the point that Geeta was saying, something you can do yourself just to empower yourself, that this is what I'm going to do to make that next step, whether it is engaging in reverse mentoring or it is actually picking up a book. But what's that next stage, the next step you'd want to take?
Thank you, Sassy. And the reason I said Suki is because she actually had a really great question, although she didn't make it today, which was, how can I make my workplace more inclusive? That is to include people. And I think that's a really good question to be asking yourself. And finally, Janice, what's I think
I've got a mishmash from everyone, actually. Never mind. My question is, what will I do with the knowledge and learning from today to make a positive difference in this whole area of neurodiversity? What can I do?
So I hope those coaching questions will help you continue thinking. And I think that's really important for you to continue thinking. You don't get this done in a 1 hour webinar. It's something to continue working on and to continue thinking about as well. So thank you all so much for your inputs. It was really, really helpful to listen to you. Our next event is on the 25th of May, and we'd really love to see you there. Yes, you can get that promotion. How can a coach help? So those of you who are thinking about getting promoted and wanting to get promoted, it will be a really good session for you. I want to say a huge thanks to Janice, Sassy and Geeta, who you can find out more about in the Diverse Coach Directory, a directory which connects corporate organizations with coaches, executive coaches from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And again, I'll put the link in the chat. It's really worth checking out. They are amazing coaches in the directory. So thank you so much for joining us today. Hope you found it useful. You will also get a recording of this session to watch it again, and we will put those links so those are available to you because there were a lot shared today. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. And I'm just going to, don't go, please, Sassy, Geeta, and Janice.